Alright, peace and greetings, YouTubers. So welcome to another edition of In the News. Let's just jump right into it. I have to say, this has been a very interesting week of current events to follow. And I say that because, of course, when you live in a country of 330 million people, there's going to be something that happens out of pocket each and every day. You know what I mean? And of course, add on top of the fact this planet has 8 billion, you really start seeing some crazy stories every single day. I feel like sometimes we don't even really scratch the surface of everything that's happening just because there's so much. But the highlight of my week has been watching people splurge and hoard on gasoline because they thought there was a gas shortage. That has been the most entertaining thing I've watched all week. And I say that because it's almost like reflex in this country where whenever they announce that there's a shortage of something, instead of people thinking as a collective and saying, okay, well, let's find a way to make the best out of what's available and make sure that everybody can benefit, we're like, nah, every man for himself, go for it. And so everybody just goes and splurges, kind of like, you know, living in DC, anytime there's an announcement about, oh, there's going to be a blizzard, prepare. And so you think people go and get the essentials, but no, when you go to the grocery store, people take everything, like everything. You go in the grocery store, there's no more mops. I'm like, what? You know, there's no horseradish on the shelf. I'm like, y'all took all the horseradish? What are y'all making so? Like, please let me know what y'all making at home. There's no horseradish on the shelf. Don't ask why I was looking for some, but I'm just saying, it didn't have none on the shelf the last time. I'm like, okay. But yeah, and so you watch everybody go and just load up on all the gasoline. And so you're watching people get gasoline by any means necessary. Even people who don't even really drive. There's some people who really maybe drive 20 miles a week because maybe they don't have to work anymore, or everything they need is within close proximity, so they don't even really have to drive far. But even those people, you watch them load up and get as much gas as they could. And people are putting gas in trash bags, buckets, trash cans, pans. That was the one that got me, was the guy putting it in all these different pans. I'm like, how does that work? Because it wasn't like the pan had a lid that you put it on. It was like, no, it was just in a pan. So I'm like, okay, so I'm guessing you put the pan in the car while, meanwhile, you're walking super careful, because if you walk the wrong way and move too much and any splashes over or splashes out, you're gonna lose some. So you put the pan in the floor of the car, and now you have to somehow drive and not hit any potholes, not hit any bumps or staples or plates in the road. And that's not really something you can do in DC, because this is nothing but potholes and plates from all the construction and gentrification and everything else. So forget that. Do that kind of foolery in DC and the entire carpet in your car is gonna smell like gasoline. I'm just saying. So you watch that, and even the ones with the trash bags. I'm like, now I want to know how you're gonna get the gas from the trash bag into the car. Like, are you gonna like have somebody holding the bag and then you're scooping some up with, I don't know, a beaker or something, and then you go to the gas part of the car and try to pour it in. I'm like, y'all just, all right, interesting. All these chemicals. I'm like, these are fires waiting to happen. And I saw there were a few people whose vehicles exploded because they had all this gasoline in there, and I don't know, somebody lit a match or something happened. I'm like, this is crazy. Reminds me of my grandma's car. Back in the day, my grandma used to have this 1982 Camaro. Like, it was a car my mom gave to her because my mom bought it back in like 84 when she was in Jersey. And so she gave it to my grandma. But my grandma, for some reason, used to have all these chemicals in the back of her car. And it would be the craziest thing, because she'd have like a can of like WD-40. She'd have a can of like bug spray, bleach, 409, oil for the car, all kind of stuff, cleaners, stuff to go in the lump, all kind of stuff, and all that would be in the back for some reason. And then, she'd make me and my cousin Brandon get in the back of the car to go to church. And mind you, this is Savannah, Georgia. And so it's 110 degrees outside with the heat index because it's July. And so, we're in our church clothes, dressed up, sweating and everything. The car at this point, the AC wasn't working anymore, because I don't think my grandma ever really took that car to do anything other than get oil. Like, she wasn't going to take, anything like engine mounts to get replaced. None of that was happening. It was like, give me some oil and that's it. So that car had been through it. And so by the time I was old enough to remember riding in it, the AC didn't work anymore. So it'd be like 156,000 degrees in the car. We're on the way to church. She's driving. All these different cans and chemicals are just rolling every time she hits the brakes. It was like we were a bomb, like a ticking time bomb, just waiting to explode on the way to church. I'm like, you know what? That's what it reminds me of. But I don't know. It's so interesting. Whenever something crazy happens in this country, just watching the collective reaction and response is interesting. Even like with COVID, there were some people who chose, okay, well, I'm going to start wearing gloves because I don't want to touch things, because people weren't really sure if COVID was spreading from surfaces. And so I kept thinking of the lady where there's the footage of her on the subway. She has those purple, like, latex gloves, and she's eating the fries, from McDonald's, wherever she got them from. Now, mind you, with the gloves that have touched everything, that have touched the doors, and again, no disrespect to people in New York, but everybody knows the subway is not the cleanest place. MTA, it ain't that clean over there. And so I'm just thinking of all the things that she's touched, and meanwhile, she's zipping the fries I'm just like, oh, well, listen, if you didn't catch COVID by now, you at least got Hep C at this point. So, interesting, but crazy week. So between that and the clip of the tiger in Houston that was just kind of running around, because that story is crazy too, and apparently there's more layers. It has something to do with somebody who was wanted for murder and some other things, and then somebody went and randomly picked up the tiger and drove off, and they're still looking for the tiger. I'm just like, this has been an interesting week. And then I kept thinking of the kids that always lose their house key, because growing up, my brother stayed losing his house key. He probably got a new house key every 2 or 3 months. Like, if somebody wanted to break in our house and steal all our stuff, they could have, because Marcus was going to stay losing the key. But I was like, what happens to that kid that loses that house key and they get off the bus and they can't get in the house, and now there's a tiger running around on the street? And like with a tiger, it's not like you can run anywhere because they can outrun you. You can't climb on top of anything. You can't climb on top of a car or something because they can climb too and jump. You can't go under the car or something and hide because they can squeeze under some stuff too. And even if you go under a car or something, they got a long enough reach with them claws to just... So I'm like, wow, crazy. It's a whole lot going on. Makes me kind of want to go back and rewatch Tiger King. That goddamn Carol Baskin. Anyway, what else is going on? Oh, as far as music, I did get a chance to listen to J. Cole's album. I think it's okay. I'll be honest, my favorite J. Cole album is probably still Born Sinner. That's the one people don't really gas up a lot, but I thought Born Sinner was a great album. But no, this one was okay. It was pretty cool for what it was. I'll tell you, the artist I've been listening to a lot of lately, Duckwrth. I really like his stuff. I think I've talked about him a few times, but I think what I like about his music is that he's very free-spirited and kind of just does what he wants. And so I appreciate that there's a bright energy to his music. I don't think you see a lot of that right now, and so I'm rooting for Duckwrth to really catch on. I can definitely see him blowing up in like another year and a half. I just think his music he's just doing whatever he wants. And I think sometimes musically, you just need some artists that really will go against the status quo, go against the grain, and really just make something that's expressive to them and connect. So I've really enjoyed a lot of his work. I really like that song World on Wheels. Y'all know I love a good up-tempo, and that's an up-tempo. I'm like, thank you. Somebody's finally making something with some life to it. I mean, everything don't gotta be gloom and doom all day. My God. The world's already terrible enough. At least let the music be happy. But so that's that. And again, I didn't get a chance to talk about Verzuz. I'm only going to talk about it for like half of 30 seconds because we got to keep moving. But I thought Verzuz was a fun watch. It was enjoyable to watch both artists perform their material. I will say, if Verzuz wants to go the realm of having the artist perform as opposed to just kind of playing the songs, I do think they might want to set up the platform to make it more appropriate for artists to be able to perform. Maybe like something with the sound system so that artists can really polish and do what they do. I thought SWV and Escape sounded great. But again, if you want to start going the route of having the artists really start performing the material instead of just kind of playing it and reflecting on it, then kind of set it up where it can kind of be more of a live performance show where you have a better sound system that's more fitting for what the artists are doing, and maybe have a live band out there. That would be kind of fun, kind of like what you saw with Alicia Keys and John Legend, where they were on the pianos and they did their thing. That could kind of be fun to watch. I think it's fun to just hear people sing, but it's even better when you can enhance the musical experience as a whole and make it a whole thing. Some people were kind of complaining, saying, oh, they don't sound that great, this, that, and the third. I'm like, well, it's because they're singing to a CD that's playing in the background. And, the microphones are not sound checked and everything to fit an actual performance. Because, of course, if you have something like a group singing on a stage, then normally the mics are kind of leveled for different purposes. So whoever's usually singing lead, their mic is going to be a little bit louder. And then maybe there's some extra EQ in the microphones for the people that are singing the backgrounds to kind of balance and blend the sound so that they can blend better. And then when the lead vocalist kind of goes back into singing into the hook with everybody else, the mic is adjusted to fit so the blend is a good blend and there's not somebody blaring over everybody else. Like, none of that's really happening with something like a verse. It's just kind of like, it is what it is, go for it. But it is what it is. That was a fun watch to see, and it's funny because every time I get on here and I'm like, I'm so tired of verses, I'm not gonna keep watching. They just every time, and then I watch every single one. But that was a fun one to watch. I was surprised Tiny showed up. I didn't think she was gonna be there, to be honest. But it is what it is. Anyway, moving on. And then when it comes to Fat Joe and the statements he's made in regards to DJ Khaled being the Quincy Jones of hip-hop when it comes to being a producer, pretty much he was stating that he personally feels that DJ Khaled is like a Quincy Jones in hip-hop because he's able to successfully get a lot of big names together on a record and release it, and it's a hit. And so that's why he feels that DJ Khaled is pretty much the Quincy Jones of hip-hop when it comes to the world of production. Me personally, I can't say that I agree. And again, you don't have to agree with me on anything that I'm about to say. This is just how I feel from the outside looking in. And I understand that he's saying in the world of hip-hop, and that's kind of supposed to be like a covering, so it's not him saying that he is just like Quincy Jones, but he's just saying in respect to hip-hop, he sees him as a Quincy Jones. I just don't see it. And I say that because, one, Quincy Jones to me is a rare type in anything. And so when you're just talking about music, I, one, see him as a musician, but not just a musician, but like top tier. Like, I mean, pristine, superb, top notch, the standard. He can do any and everything. Well studied, has contributed generations of music with all of these soundtracks to their lives. You know, just decades and decades of work. And even in his 80s, he's still getting work because his work just carries that well. And again, some of his stuff is so timeless. And I mean, he's literally, you know, pretty much a musical genius. And I only put so many people in that category. But if we're having this conversation of hip-hop producers that maybe could fall into that category, DJ Khaled is not at the top of my list. I don't even know if he's in the middle. You know, I would have put other people up there first. And, you know, and I'm not saying these people to me are the equivalent of Quincy Jones, but again, before I would have ever thought of DJ Khaled, I would have at least said maybe Pharrell Williams or Timbaland, or I would have even thought maybe Swiss Beats or the Hitmakers or Missy Elliott or Kanye. I would have T-Pain, The Dream, even Ty Dolla $ign or Organized Noise. I would have put any of them first just because I feel personally the production that they have done carries and covers so much more ground. You know, I feel like there's a wider ear and a bigger appreciation for music where a lot of the people named, especially somebody like a Missy Elliott, can do a little bit of any and everything, or even Pharrell Williams. Like when you look at what Pharrell Williams has been able to do, yes, he's working with the who's who in music, but he can also go and jump into other genres. Like I'll definitely say Gloria Estefan came out with an album in 2012, 2013 that was pretty much Pharrell Williams, that he did like most of the production. It was a really great album, but it was also something that still fit Gloria Estefan. So it was kind of like it could be something that was appealing to newer audiences, but still please her core fan base that would have rolled with her in the 80s and the 90s. Or, you know, he's even done stuff with like Madonna on the Hard Candy album and other different artists. Or again, like even SWV, you know, the Right Here remix. So somebody like a Pharrell Williams, his range, it spread. Same with somebody like a Kanye, same with like a Missy who can do pop, hip-hop, R&B, not just for herself, but for other people. So she can give you like a Fantasia, Free Yourself, and then she can go and do production on some bigger songs and other tracks from different artists that are in a totally different lane. And Organized Noise, where not only do they make these great tracks, but they actually are musicians. And so, you know, there's so much that could be said, and I just think, I just don't see that. And for me, with DJ Khaled, he's always got some smoke for me. I didn't really rock with him after the stuff he said about Tyler the Creator and his album, because I remember the previous album that DJ Khaled came out with, it didn't go to number one because Tyler the Creator's was number one. So DJ Khaled felt some kind of way and made this whole speech about how he makes real music and not that weird stuff. And that right there was like, okay, I see where he's at. Like, he doesn't even know how to expand his range because he already has a limited scope of what music is, especially when it comes to black audiences when he's not even black. But okay, so it's kind of like, all right, you already have a limited scope of how you see things musically, so that's why I'm already like, you're not even expanding yourself, so sit down somewhere. That's how I always felt. Like, you're gonna go after somebody just because they were successful. And then again, I'm just like, no. And when I look at Khaled, I think a lot of his biggest hits usually are something that's sampled, but when he samples, it's not even like he does great samples. And I mean that with love. I just feel like a lot of his stuff, like, think of like Wildest Thoughts. If you're talking about the production value, you didn't have to do that much. He pretty much already just took the Carlos Santana song and put some new people over the instrumental, did a few little things to the EQs and released it. That was the production. Or even the song he has with SZA. Like, that song, when I tell you, I used to skip it every time I heard it on the radio. And it wasn't because it was a bad song. It's just, for some reason, I was triggered listening to it because, you know, it samples Outkast, Miss Jackson, but there was nothing that was really done differently to the production. It was literally just SZA singing over pretty much the instrumental. SZA, I think, carries the song and does her part, but I'm like, y'all didn't even like make an effort to, you know, maybe spruce up the music. Even when it gets to the bridge of the song, they didn't even like change the key or the tempo or anything. They just changed the EQ and the setting so it sounds a little bit different, but it's still the same loop, the same sample. I'm like, are you serious? Like, if you want to have a conversation of sampling, you know, I always say go back and check out a lot of those Tribe Called Quest albums. I think I talked about this on one of my live sessions, but just talking about the process of what sampling used to be before the emergence of something like Pro Tools, where back in the day, a lot of those 80s and 90s artists that did a lot of sampling, but specifically when you talk about anybody that was a part of that Native Tongues collective, so like a De La Soul or Tribe Called Quest and anybody else in that group, or Moni Love and all of them, like, sampling back then was you literally had to go and find all the songs that you wanted. They would take a vinyl, set it up with the equipment to get the piece that they wanted from the vinyl onto a cassette tape, and then loop it. So now they have this piece that's looping, and then they find another vinyl with a different song that they like, and they go and put that on and do the same thing and have it, collaborate with what's already looping. So now you have two songs kind of looping, and they keep doing it over and over and over until they've created a song. And so when you look at some of those Tribe Called Quest songs, some of those songs have like 14 and 15 samples in it because the people that were working on it, they had such an ear for so many different sounds where you don't even realize half the stuff that you're listening to, but it's been created in a realm where it's a brand new song built from a bunch of different songs, and there's not just one sample that stands out and carries. It's really a brand new song. Like, to me, I think that's what sampling should do. Or if you're going to sample something and kind of pay homage to something of the past, I feel like you're supposed to enhance what's already been done. I shouldn't feel like I'm listening to the great value version of a song, and it's not to fry him up. I'm just like, I don't see it. I just think if you're gonna throw Quincy Jones in the conversation, then I expect to see some things that just wow me. I will say DJ Khaled has a few tracks that I like a little bit on this new album. I do like the song Hello. I was like, okay, this one's all right, but overall I was just like, no. And I guess with Fat Joe's argument, his thing was like, it's about him getting these big guests on there, and that's why he's one of the greatest. He can get Jay-Z and Nas on the same song, and I'm like, yeah, that's cool. I mean, it would have been cool if it happened in 2001, but, I think for me, that's what DJ Khaled has to do, because you're not going to buy a DJ Khaled album if it's just him on there. Like, that's his brand. His goal and his branding is getting people on a song together and releasing it, because there's not a whole lot that he's doing minus, some of the production. But, if they say he's coming to town to do a concert, if you don't see 10 other people on the bill, you're probably not going to get tickets. And it's not to be disrespectful, but it's just like, no. And so I personally don't care if you have a bunch of big names on a song. Like, I want to know that the song is good, because a lot of times what I notice with some of the songs that he has with all the big names, you can just tell that they just came in to drop a verse and they went home. There's not this whole energy or this collective of really creating a brilliant body of work. I always love to see the stories of different artists where they're like, oh, we were, there was a collaboration. We were in the studio till 5 a.m. and we couldn't come up with anything, and I just happened to turn a page in the book and somebody forgot to turn the equipment off, and so the microphone picked up the sound of the page turning, and I was like, yo, loop that. And so next thing you know, there's the sound of the page turning, and it's a loop. And then, somebody was like, oh, that sounds kind of dope. And then I put a beat behind it, and now it's, and, so on and so forth. Like, that's the kind of stuff I want to hear if you're talking about sampling and production. I don't get that kind of energy from Khaled. No disrespect, but, I'm just like, I'm sorry. I don't see it. Other people may. I'm just not that impressed by artists getting other artists on a collaboration. That's cool, but, I just personally think there's only a handful of people that can even be a part of that conversation where you can make those kind of comparisons to like a Quincy Jones. And I think there's a certain class of artists and creators that have contributed so much to music, and I just think sometimes it's almost insulting to just kind of throw anybody up there in the same room with them. Some of those people I would think of, like, I think Dozier Holland is another one. Like, you would know them from pretty much all of Motown. A lot of the great songs from Motown they did, or even like a Smokey Robinson, Stevie Wonder, Prince, Patrice Rushen, I think, is another one, as far as just a talent and a musicality that exists. I don't see musicality with DJ Khaled, no disrespect. I don't see it. But like a Patrice Rushen, even when you step outside of more so R&B and soul music and go to different genres, I think Phil Spector was another one where he just had this kind of creative genius. I mean, he was a little cuckoo. I think he killed somebody before, but he's the guy that did River Deep Mountain High with Tina Turner. Or Diane Warren. A lot of people know her work because she's the one that wrote pretty much most of the power ballads that you listen to in the 90s and early 2000s. Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis are great ones. By the way, I think it's Janet Jackson's 55th birthday today, so happy birthday, Janet. I couldn't afford nothing at that auction you had. I don't have that kind of money. I was looking at that auction. She had stuff on there. Everything was like $4,000 and $5,000 for like a pencil. I'm like, all right, well, I'll watch from the sidelines. But anyway, Ashford and Simpson. And even if you're coming out of production, but you're just talking about creative direction or supporting another artist, whether they're on tour or something, I think somebody like Elisa Fisher can even go in that category as a supporting vocalist, where she had her own music career, but she kind of stepped down to go and tour with other artists and pretty much be the person that arranges all their background vocals. And so she's somebody that's toured with so many different people all around the world. And, or even Mary Clayton from the 60s and the 70s, and, or music directors, Adam Blackstone, who pretty much is the music director for every award show you watch and has worked with everybody from Mary J. Blige to you name it, or even like a Rex Salas. So I just think in music sometimes I just feel like people don't be studied enough, and it gets on my nerves because people always want to make somebody the next this or the next that, and it's like you chip away at the legacy of the greats to try to gas up somebody that you're vibing with at the moment. And it's no disrespect to that person, but I just feel that if I was in a capacity to have a following for, I guess, my music or something like that, I don't want to be known as the next anybody. Don't compare me to nobody. Like, I would love to pay homage, or I'd love to hear people say, oh, well, he's definitely influenced by this person. That's cool. But I'm not trying to be that person, or I'm not trying to take anybody else's lane. I want to have my own. And so it's crazy that there's this obsession with always trying to put everybody in somebody else's lane. And I think the dangers of doing that is you erase that person's legacy over time, because again, fast forward 100 years from now, there's no guarantee that a lot of the names that we gas up today will even be known, because time will progress and people will move on. So I think it's better for people to all have their own lane, because if you keep putting everybody in someone else's, that someone else gets erased out of the conversation over time, because you kept replacing that lane with someone else, and now the conversation gets lost, the legacy kind of gets dismissed, and you got to go and dig through the trenches to find things. I did not mean for this segment to be so long, but I don't know. I got triggered when I heard that interview. But, you know, it is what it is. You know, I think DJ Khaled does what he does and it works. He makes hits. But, again, I just think Quincy Jones might not be the person you want to make that comparison to. That's all. Anyway, moving on. All right, so this next story, I just want to read a little something real quick, and then we'll chat. By the way, please share your comments on this part in the comment section, because I just want to hear how other people feel about this one. So it says, California school offers white student support circle after Chauvin verdict. Now, this is from April, but I just now found it, so I'm a little bit late to the party. But anyway, a California school district is being criticized for offering a support circle for white students after Derek Chauvin was found guilty of murder and the death of George Floyd. A TikTok video with more than 4,700 comments shows an email from Piedmont Unified School District's assistant superintendent about a white student support group for white students who would like to discuss how the trial, verdict, and experiences related to George Floyd murder are impacting you. Floyd, a 46-year-old black man, died while in police custody last May, and his death sparked protests across the nation. He died after Chauvin, a former Minneapolis police officer who was white, pressed a knee into Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes, as 3 other officers didn't intervene. Chauvin was found guilty of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. Superintendent Randall Booker released a statement on Saturday calling the email's subject line referring to white student support group as a poor choice of words that led to the perception that white students needed the same kind of support as our black, indigenous, people of color students. By the way, I'm so sick of them putting everybody in all these different umbrella categories. That's starting to work my nerves. We got so many categories we all got to be put under together when we all have our own different battles and different challenges. And so I'm really not a fan of this whole black and brown collective, put everybody in the same bubble and brush them off, and then the only group that gets to stand alone as their own are white Americans. I'm not down with that, but whatever. Students of all racial backgrounds rightfully push back on the idea. We agree, and we want to affirm in the strongest terms that our commitment is to give all students a place to express their feelings and to learn how to engage in important issues, Booker said. He added, the intent of a circle for white allies is to discuss how to be a better ally in pursuit of racial justice. Additionally, we are planning to offer circles open to all in order to give students of different backgrounds a chance to process together. The school district did not immediately respond to McClatchy News' request for comment on Tuesday morning. The district says its racial equality and policy goals are committing the school to fighting institutional racism, making sure the district is an inclusive and welcoming environment for black, indigenous, people of color, and getting rid of gaps in opportunity for black, indigenous, people of color students. Okay, so here's my thing. Now, that's some great PR as far as the save and trying to paint it as, oh no, this is for everybody. But here's my thing. If you wanted to have a conversation about what was happening and maybe having this lane of bringing in conversations about allyship, then why didn't you do it when the initial incident took place in May of 2020? Why didn't you have the conversation while the whole country was in an uproar and there were all of these different protests all around the country? Why didn't you have those conversations anytime before the actual verdict gets in? What doesn't sit right in my spirit is you now have this white cop who finally has been convicted of this crime, and now here you go, you want to finally have a conversation specifically for how it has impacted white students. And I'm like, clearly it doesn't make sense to me, because clearly if you wanted to have that conversation about allyship and everything else, it should have taken place when the conversation was something that was taking place. When these kids literally saw a video of a man get murdered on camera and you watched it go viral, and this was something that was circulating in the news, in the airwaves and in the news cycle every single day, that would have been the time to have the conversation, because that is when that moment was impacting the lives of those students. The fact that you all wait until the verdict gets out, to me, that just symbolizes the fact that whiteness has been challenged. And when I say whiteness has been challenged, what I mean is you have a police officer who's finally been convicted and will serve time for killing a black man, something that is extremely rare at this point in time. And we recognize that in the past few years, the idea of whiteness, and when I say whiteness, I'm not saying white people, but I'm saying the system that continues to benefit white Americans and continues to disenfranchise other groups of people, all at the expense of making sure that white Americans continue to live the life that they live at the expense of everybody else. The fact that that is starting to be challenged, now all of a sudden you want to have a support circle. And so again, it kind of just shows that things are so far behind when it comes to what kind of progress people think we're having. It's just, it goes back to that conversation we've had again, where again, when you have the conversation of white Americans, they're so used to operating as the standard. And when you get to be the standard in everything, you don't have to challenge yourself. You don't have to think outside of the box. You don't have to do anything out of the ordinary, because everything is already aligned and created for you in order to prosper. And everybody else, we don't have that same experience. And so when I saw that, okay, they magically wait until there's a verdict that comes out that convicts this police officer. And let's be honest, when we're talking about what's happening with Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, there's a whole bunch of race in that conversation. There were a lot of white people who were rooting for Derek Chauvin to get off, because in their minds they already convicted George Floyd, because they said, oh, well, he had a substance abuse problem, so he must be guilty, and we're going to latch onto every reason as to why he didn't die at the hands of having a neck pressed, but he died because he didn't take care of himself and he had a substance abuse problem. So all of a sudden, we're going to move the goalposts when it comes to the conversation of substance abuse. You know, if it's something with opioids and everything, all of a sudden it's an epidemic in the country, and we need rehabilitation and therapy, and we need compassion, and we need to feel sorry for all of these white Americans who are now addicted to prescription drugs or anything else like that, because these are just really hard times. However, if a black person is taking the exact same thing, no, they deserve to die. They must be criminals again. So again, that goalpost being moved, but watching, you know, a collective of people get to operate as a standard, and now that's being challenged, and you're starting to see the resentment, and you're seeing it all the time. This is why you're seeing the influx of videos where, I don't know, again, somebody had a moment in the grocery store and now they're pissed off and they go and do the whole speech about, you're the reason we're losing the country, that same kind of thing. Or even like now, it's interesting, you see white Americans show up to everything with guns now. It can be a school board meeting just because they decided, you know, we want to have a meeting about changing the mascot, because maybe the mascot is an offensive logo or an offensive, you know, mascot. It's a Native American group, and it's some mascot of somebody. We want to change it to be more inclusive, and now you got parents showing up with AR-15s because they're pissed off. Like, that's what you're seeing, because again, that challenge is taking place. People aren't used to being challenged in that realm from that collective, because again, they've had the luxury of being the standard their entire lives. And so now small things that aren't even oppressive to them, but just things that make life more pretty much inclusive to everybody, for them, they feel like they're losing something. And that's why you're seeing so much violence, so much animosity. And just to prove my point, some people aren't gonna like this, but I've always said personally, I feel that black people collectively can fit into any space within this country. Like, we can go into a space with nothing but white folks and fit right in if we want to. Mainly because society already conditions you to figure out how to maneuver to keep white Americans comfortable. If you're not white, that's for any group of people who are not white, but specifically for black folks, you're already conditioned to operate as a collective in a way that keeps other people comfortable. And so we know and pretty much can go in any environment and fit right in. It happens with work. When you talk about what's professional, when you have the conversation of professionalism, you know, we already know when we start submitting our resume for something, if you got, you know, a very unique name, you might not want to put it on there. Okay, let's put something else down. We just already know, like the fact that a lot of us have very unique names, too unique for the company, not professional enough. We know that there's certain things that we can't go and do. Or even, I just saw the story, actually I'll read a piece of it, even when it comes to youth and in sports, about the girl who had to cut her beads that was playing softball. The article says, Nicole Piles, a 16-year-old student at Hillside High School in North Carolina, told the Youth Justice Project that an umpire allegedly threatened to remove her from a game on April 19th because her hair covered her number 6 jersey. Powell says she tucked her hair into the back part of her jersey, but claims the umpire, who was enforcing a rule that prohibits the use of hair beads, wasn't satisfied. That's when the ump had basically said to my coach that either I take the beads out or I can't play. She recalled to the Youth Justice Project, "This is the second inning going on the third, and my beads are now a problem. I felt embarrassed, and I most definitely felt disrespected, she explained, adding that she had her teammates cut her hair so she could stay in the game. I just felt like the world was staring at me. Why me? Why anybody for that fact? Again, even that story pretty much mirrors what we saw some years back with the wrestler who had to cut their locks. Remember, there was a wrestler who had the locks, and the ref was saying, oh no, you can't have long hair because it's not safe. And of course, he was like, okay, well, I'll put it in the hair cap, which is what he would normally do. But that ref said, nope, not at all. And so this poor student actually went and cut their locks. You know, something that you've been growing for years just so you can have this match. And what pissed me off the most is you have the coach helping them cut it, and then the other teammates are clapping and egging them on. You're so brave, man. You're so awesome. And everybody in the arena is clapping. I'm like, this is what we're talking about. When other groups of people get to be the center of how other people operate, where somehow, because going back to the girl in that article, clearly the girl's already been playing the game. All of a sudden the umpire feels some kind of way, and you're just saying, okay, well, we can't do this because your hair is covering the number. Okay, well, we'll put it inside the jersey. Now it's covered. Oh no, that's not good enough. My thing is, why didn't you say something beforehand? Why wasn't that in, I guess, some bylaws before they even got to the game? And I'm sure that wasn't the first game of the season, and they were able to play other games and there wasn't any issues at all until they got to this umpire. But that's the point that I'm talking about, where again, we have to operate in a capacity where if we're not meeting the standards of what has been set by who deems themselves to be the standard, then all of a sudden it's a problem, and we have to always assimilate and shift over. All right, even like in entertainment, a show like Family Feud, which is a fun show to watch, but in order to be successful at a game like Family Feud, you have to think and operate as a white person in order to win. So when they have these questions, and it's like survey asks 100 people and then there's a random question, you literally have to look at it through the lens of how white Americans would see things. So, you know, if they say, you know, I don't know, favorite cities to go to, you're gonna have to think, okay, what are the cities that most white Americans go to? You know, somebody like us, you might say, oh, I like to go to Chicago because I like to go to the bite or the taste of Chicago in the summer or in July, or I like to go to Philly because they have a really great music festival. That's usually not what white Americans are saying. So you got to think and say, okay, well, you know, I really would like to go to Scottsdale, Arizona, or some crap like that. Like, you just already kind of know that. But again, if you turn the tables, a lot of times other people can't fit in that same realm where they're not the main center focus of everything. They lose their minds. Think of all the clips you see where a white person gets inconvenienced and the next thing you know, they want to start calling everybody the N-word. Then when they get called out, they want to cry. Oh, I just had a hard day. I'm just having such a hard day. And I'm like, well, why is it every time y'all have a hard day, the first thing you want to do is be racist? Like, that's like the standard that's the go-to. Again, so used to being the standard in the center of everything that when something inconveniences you to the slightest, you just bring out the extremities. You bring out the worst of the worst. Like, that's the world we're living in. And so I'm just like, wow. Interesting that the school would wait until Derek Chauvin has been convicted to all of a sudden want to have a support circle. What about the black students at that school that have had to sit there and watch people who look like them get slaughtered literally every other month, and then watch all these different videos go viral every month, and there's no empathy? And then when you feel some kind of way about people who look like you being unjustifiably killed and you speak out, you're being gaslit. You're being told that you're out of your mind, or it's not a big deal, bro. They should have complied, and so on and so forth. Where were the support circles then? You want to give a support circle because somebody who murdered somebody is going to jail, and you're worried about how that affects white students that may have aligned with that officer? Maybe you need to restructure your history curriculums because them kids are already on the wrong path. And so, no, I'm not having it. It's kind of like this other clip I saw, and this is why I'm really like, I think especially for black folks, if you're only depending on the schools to educate your children, you're in a world of hurt. You're going to have to really educate your children at home as well. Whatever they're learning at school does not always correlate with their real world experience. Now, this is actually out of the UK. But again, I feel like you've seen this same scenario happen in the United States so much it doesn't make a difference. But I saw this clip coming out of the UK where they had these students pretend to be on slave ships and pretend to do the whole, transatlantic slave route and everything. And so the kids are marching. And so you're looking at the kids and they're all just kind of excited and marching. And it's like a whimsical thing to do. And I'm just like, what are the kids getting out of this? What is the goal here? Because what I'm looking at as far as this clip that's playing, it's this very watered down, it wasn't too bad of an experience. And so these kids will grow up and say, well, we did an activity once where we got to see what it was like, and it wasn't too bad. The people, they had food, they were properly housed, and, they got to learn English and so on and so forth. And you see that in the curriculum. They write these things where, slavery wasn't too bad, and you're watching them literally try and change the narrative. And now even in American schools, there's this whole conversation about, critical race theory all of a sudden that's magically popped up, and all these people are putting into legislation that you can't teach about it as if that's even in the curriculums to begin with. So we're seeing that where, again, when you get to operate as the standard and now the standard is being challenged, Absolutely not. You're going to do everything to shut that down. So now when we need to have these conversations and really bring out the realities of what it is when it comes to history, so that we don't keep repeating the same cycle and having more and more generations of people come up and just be clueless about how the world works because they only center themselves in everything and think the whole world is supposed to stop for them, you're going to keep seeing the same problem arise generation after generation, because the status quo can never be challenged, because in order to challenge that status quo, it takes down part of that system. Nobody wants that, because there's a certain group that benefits from that system and everybody else is disadvantaged unless they play into that system and disadvantage their own collective to climb up. And so that's where we're at right now. And so it's just like, wow, a lot. Absolutely crazy, right? And so it's just draining to witness all of these different things. I'm like, wow, I can't. You want to all of a sudden have the support group after the verdict. Where were y'all at all 2020? All 2020. I can't. Anyway, moving on. So this next story, of course, pretty much sums up what I always say on this channel anyway, as far as how the goalpost continues to get moved and how there's double standards and how things always work, especially when people think they're losing something. Remember some videos back, we did the story about how all of those black farmers were getting a payout from the U.S. government, and not just specifically black farmers, but pretty much what you called disadvantaged farmers. So pretty much Native American farmers, Latino farmers, Pacific Islander farmers, a lot of black farmers, people who pretty much got screwed over by the U.S. government in the past. And because of that, they weren't able to grow into a capacity where they could go into industry and really grow these large, giant USDA farms. If you really want a better reference, it's a video I did, I think on like March 10th or something. I know it's the video that I did. It was like in the news, and I know I was talking about the Coming to America movie on it. But if you go back to that video, it's like a 20-minute segment where we kind of go over all of that, including the history of why there aren't that many black farmers today. And we jump into the conversation of heirs property and how that affected people who were eligible to become USDA farms, so on and so forth. If you want to understand the context of where I'm going with this story, you might want to go back and visit that one first if you haven't seen it. But anyway, I want to read this and then we're going to jump to a conversation. 5 white farmers sue USDA over debt relief plan. 5 white farmers are claiming the $4 billion debt forgiveness program being implemented by the USDA is unconstitutional in a lawsuit filed in federal court in Wisconsin. The debt forgiveness program offers 120% relief for direct and guaranteed loans held by socially disadvantaged farmers, including Black/African American, American Indian or Alaskan Native, Hispanic or Latino, and Asian American or Pacific Islander. The additional 20% is to be used to pay off taxes farmers would owe on the debt relief payments. The lawsuit is at least the second to be filed, alleging constitutional problems with the program. Texas AG Commissioner Sid Miller filed a class action lawsuit in Texas earlier this week. USDA and congressional Democrats have defended the language. USDA recognizes that socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers have faced a systemic discrimination with cumulative effects that have, among other consequences, led to a substantial loss in the number of socially disadvantaged producers, reduced the amount of farmland they control, and contributed to a cycle of debt that was exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic. Zach Duckwrth, administrator of USDA's Farm Service Agency, says on a government webpage explaining the program. But in the lawsuit, the producers say such language is discriminatory. There is a case for loan forgiveness for individuals, said Christopher Baird, who owns a dairy farm near Ferryville in Crawford County, Wisconsin, where he milks over 50 Jersey cows and farms about 80 acres of pasture. He has 3 different loans with FSA. But we shouldn't be looking at the color of someone's skin and saying this person needs more help or less help based on the color of their skin. That's just wrong. The farmers are represented by the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, which was founded in 2011 and calls itself the most active and influential free market policy organization in the state of Wisconsin. The defendants are AG Secretary Tom Vilsack and Duckwrth. Alright, so to sum things up and fast forward really quick, because there's a lot more to read, but I don't want to read the whole article. Long story short, so like we said, the Joe Biden administration says, okay, boom, we're going to give out this relief to all these farmers who have been socially disadvantaged for generations, and it's played a role as to pretty much how successful they can be in modern times, because now they're not in a capacity where they can industrialize what it is that they've been able to do, because they are not considered USDA farms, or there's other things that have taken place that have slowed down their progress. And so now you have white farmers who are suing because they feel they should get a piece of that as well. They now feel it's discriminatory. One of the things we need to remember is, during the Trump administration, because we got into the trade wars with China, a lot of the American farmers started to struggle. So there was this big giant bailout that bailed out a lot of our American farmers. The issue with that was almost 100% of the bailout money went to white farmers. And I can guarantee you that the 5 farmers that are a part of this lawsuit got some of that bailout. And so these same people who are now getting what you call the additional $4 billion bailout coming from the Biden administration, they didn't get any of this Trump money because they technically weren't eligible. And so now it's so funny that people will latch onto this conversation about, oh, it's not fair because, we shouldn't look at the color of the people's skin to decide things. I'm like, it's funny y'all bring that up after you benefited. And so again, because of the color of a lot of these farmers' skin and the laws and everything that was allowed in reference to what it is that they could do, they were left out of conversations. They were left out of opportunities. And for generations, they had to play a backseat to different things. And so they weren't eligible for a lot of the benefits that many white farmers in America get. And then when you have the conversation, like we said, about heirs property and land and how things have been pretty much snatched up and stolen, and people couldn't afford to maintain their farms because of the way that the system was set up to work against black farmers, that's why we are where we're at today. And it's so funny that even when the government comes out with something that tries to somewhat help people who are in a dire situation that pretty much was already created by the government, people still feel like they're losing something and they have to center themselves in it. So now, because you have disadvantaged farmers who've gotten a short end of the deal, and they're still, getting a short end of the deal, but the government's trying to remedy it a little bit. Other farmers are like, you got to include us in that too, because we are all American. We don't need this content of their character. We need to bring this all together and be one big family. Meanwhile, they're benefiting from the fact that these other farmers are disadvantaged. And what makes it interesting is the bill doesn't say anything about specifically black farmers, specifically Latino farmers. It says disadvantaged farmers, and it highlights the farmers who were the most disadvantaged at the time. So that still means that there are white farmers that are even eligible for that. But white farmers don't see it as that. They say, oh no, you've written something for them specifically and you didn't include us. Now, mind you, we've had every benefit in the world, including the most recent bailout from the Trump administration, but we want this one too. They didn't get that one, but we deserve this one too because you're discriminating against us. And so it's so interesting that that's what ends up happening. You watch people all of a sudden, they're comfortable watching other people suffer. Then when you start trying to make other people whole and it recognizes the fact that, hey, that could lead to competition, now all of a sudden you want to feel disenfranchised. Nope, can't do it. It almost reminds me again like when we had that conversation with like Meghan McCain from The View, when they were having that conversation about qualifications, and she made this whole spiel about, The View's been on the TV for 25 years and we've only had one Asian American host. So should one of us give up our jobs? I'm like, here we go again, that conversation of the fact that anytime you think somebody's supposed to get something, it means you're losing something. You could always just add another panelist to the show. You can always restructure how the show is made. You can even have it set up where maybe the panelists have certain days. Like, it's no secret, like, if you've ever watched The View, Whoopi Goldberg is not on there on Fridays because that's her day off. Okay, so if Whoopi's not on there on Fridays, bring in another panelist. Like, there's always ways to make things work for everybody. But for some reason in this country, anytime there's anything done to somewhat try to balance out an unequal playing field, people all of a sudden feel they're being under attack. This is the new slavery. It's crazy because with this specific bailout, it's literally trying to fix the wrongs of the past. And people have a problem with that. And so again, it shows you that the system that we live under continues to benefit one specific group of people. And anytime you challenge that system, they feel under attack because it means that now they don't get to be as comfortable. And the fact that you're so threatened by, some folks getting the bare minimum. They're not even getting what they deserve and you got a problem with it. That doesn't sit right with me in my spirit. Anyway, we'll see where that goes. And then when it comes to this Congressman Andrew Clyde, and the fact that they made this whole statement about what they saw January 6th as you remember, January 6th is the day that all them folks came and stormed the Capitol, burned up a few stuff, busted out some windows, and killed a few cops. All of a sudden, the narrative is starting to change now. You're watching the tune change from a collective standpoint where they're trying to paint it out as something that wasn't even that bad. Wasn't too bad, so he was saying, that was pretty much a typical tourist day. The people just kind of went and toured the Capitol, and yeah, there were some windows that got broken and some people died and there was violence and everything like that, but no, it's pretty much, just a regular kind of day. And so you're watching the narrative literally change. And it's so funny because, and this is all in the name of maintaining power and keeping some kind of element where if you can water down what happened on the 6th, you can make a lot of these terrible politicians look less terrible, including the ones that pretty much incited this riot to begin with. And so it's absolutely crazy. I'm like, here y'all go again. The goalpost, that's the theme of this video. You just watch it get moved and moved. Because again, if these were some black protesters out there protesting about reparations, the way all of them would have got sprayed the minute they busted into that Capitol, I will never forget sitting there watching all those people storm that door. And I just knew that as soon as they got in there, especially while you still had both houses in session, I just knew that you were gonna see like sniper folks coming down from the ceiling, just ready to come and handle like nothing. I just knew we were about to see a massacre on TV, because if that was some black folks, it would have been a move bombing all over again. They would have just dropped the bomb on the U.S. Capitol, just blow the whole thing up. It's contaminated. We'll start and build it over. There's no way you're gonna have that many black folks get up in there unarmed. I mean, the way that they were holding people's hands and walking them out and so on and so forth. And so you've watched them kind of change this whole narrative and paint it out to be, oh, these are just Americans that were using their First Amendment right. I'm like, I can't. But for me, I'm like, y'all moving a little slow with some of these charges and convictions. It's only about 400 people who've been charged, and I'm like, there was more than 400 people out there. Now, we do know that everybody who was out there was not there to go storm the Capitol, but I'm like, y'all, I'm seeing a whole lot of people just still skating, living it up. Y'all still ain't found whoever that person was that had the 2 bombs that they dropped off. Y'all need to get on it, all right? Y'all be finding everybody else for everything else. You have no problem locking people up for any and everything. I keep looking at this case out of Mississippi with the guy Russell Allen. It's the black man who was given a life sentence because he was in possession of 30 grams of marijuana. You know, the same drug that now people are getting rich with. The same drug where even like John Boehner, the former Speaker of the House, now has like a marijuana business as well. And so I'm watching all these people get rich off marijuana because, you know, depending on what state you're in, it is what it is. But, you know, this man was sentenced years ago to life in prison over this. And so he was fortunate enough to, you know, get a new hearing where they were going to possibly reduce the sentence. And the judge was like, no, we're going to uphold it. So imagine you're in jail for life because of 30 grams of marijuana, something that's pretty much now almost celebrated in our media, where, you know, it's even with people who run for president, it's almost a rite of passage to say, yeah, I smoked a little bit. You know, because me, I don't really consider marijuana something to be like, oh, you need to be locked up for it. The same way you can put everybody in rehab for opioids and everything else, why are you locking people up for weed? But anyway, the fact that this man is in jail for life over weed, and it's politics and ego that won't even let this man get fair justice because the judge doesn't want to budge. Meanwhile, you're watching all these people who literally stormed a Capitol ready to kill. Some of them are not even being charged. I'm like, you know what? It's a lot. But anyway, there's so much I would like to do with you guys for like the next few weeks. So hopefully I can get some of these things done that I've been meaning to get done. My schedule's been so crazy lately. So, you know, let's cross our fingers and hope we can make it to the finish line. Anyway, I'm out. Share your 2 cents. Subscribe.